Yeah.
Yes.
Hello, students!
Today we're going to talk about DNA, RNA, or proteins. Not or proteins, and proteins. We're going to talk about all three of them. So we've already spent a lot of time talking about DNA. Today we're going to focus on the two other parts of what we call the central dogma of genetics. So we know that DNA it determines an organism's traits, but what we haven't learned is that there are many steps in between from going from our genetic code to actually having physical traits that you can see, like hair color or eye color. So today we're going to learn about that process where DNA is translated into something called RNA, and RNA is transcribed into something proteins. And proteins are going to be the molecules that determine the organism's traits. So we're actually going to focus on proteins first because it's really quick. All you need to know about proteins is that there are these molecules that are made of repeating units called amino acids. So if you remember when we talked about DNA, we talked about monomers and polymers. Proteins are just a polymer that are made of amino acids. So the information contained in our DNA is used to make these proteins. You can think of it like a recipe book that's telling kind of your cells what amino acids should be attached to make what proteins. So eventually we're going to learn that there's something like 35 different amino acids that can be joined together to make the different proteins in our body. And basically all of your body is proteins. Those proteins make up all your cells. They make up all your hair. Anything about you, you're basically made of proteins. So that's all you need to know about proteins. It's kind of like you're made of proteins. So obviously your DNA's goal is to code the instructions to make proteins.
I thought DNA made RNA and that made the protein.
Well, yeah, we're going to get there. So you can think about it this way. If you have different DNA, you're going to have different proteins, and different proteins are going to have different traits. So that's the end result, these proteins. But what's this middle step I put here, the RNA, that Mr. Howard's so curious about?
RNA.
Nope, not pronounced that way. Pronounced RNA. So RNA, we're going to learn, is a middleman. So it delivers the DNA messages to different parts of your cell, specifically to something called your ribosome that we're going to learn about in a future class. But basically think about it this way. Your DNA is very important to you. If your DNA were to have any changes in it, you'd end up with different proteins and you'd end up with different traits. You'd basically be a mutant. Now, in science fiction movies like X-Men, this is pretty cool. In real life, it's really bad. Usually, if there's a change in your protein,
Cancer.
It causes cancer and it can kill you. So it's very, very important to protect your DNA from damage. DNA can actually be damaged very easily from things like sunlight and various chemicals that enter your cells. So your cells actually protect your DNA by storing it inside a nucleus. The issue is that if your DNA is stored inside the nucleus of a cell, how can it go out to the rest of the cell to make the proteins that it needs to make? How can this DNA information ever make it anywhere if it's always being stored safely inside the nucleus away from everything else? The answer, Mr. Howarth, is RNA. So RNA, we're going to learn, it acts as a blueprint of DNA, or acts as a copy of DNA. And what this does is it allows the DNA itself to stay inside the cell's nucleus the entire time, forever and ever. And copies of the DNA called RNA are what go out into the rest of the cell to go build proteins and do cell stuff. So
it's basically like the copier in that picture.
It's no, it's like the blueprint. That's why I said it's the DNA blueprint. So if you think about this analogy here you have a goofy guy. He's an architect. And so his job is to make plans on how to build a building, right? He's got the master plan on how to build a building. Now, he wouldn't take his master plan that he spent years up drawing for the new Juanita Sanchez building. He wouldn't take that and just give it right to the construction workers because they might take his master plan and then spill some coffee on it and drop it on the ground.
The coffee is the cancer.
Sure.
Okay.
Or, they might step on the ground. They'll ruin the master plan, and then he's lost his only copy, right? It's the same thing that teachers do with worksheets. I don't give you the original to write on. I give you a copy. That's the blueprint. That's the copy of the original that can go out to construction workers. So if they lose it, if they tear it, if it gets wrecked, it doesn't matter because the master plan is safe inside the office. This is our DNA here that stays inside the nucleus. And the copies go out to the rest of the cell to do the cell jobs.
Interesting.
Now, let's talk quickly about the structure of RNA. We spent a lot of time talking about the chemical structure of DNA and how that's helpful for storing a genetic code in the 4 bases, A, T, C's, and G's, and how it's helpful for replication purposes, making copies of your DNA. But how is RNA similar and how is it different?
It's different because it has a different letter.
Hey, you're absolutely right. So DNA and RNA are very similar. If you say the names out, they sound similar. Deoxyribose nucleic acid versus ribose nucleic acid. They both sound very similar. Maybe you can pick up on the difference, Mr. Howarth.
One of them has deoxy in the beginning of
Nailed it.
Woohoo!
So
10 points
if we
for
look at the
Gryffindor.
differences, the first one is in the sugar. The DNA has the sugar deoxyribose. Well, RNA has something just called a ribose sugar, and the difference is an oxygen molecule. That's why we call deoxyribose. So you can see here, I've highlighted in red. So missing an oxygen molecule. Otherwise, the sugars, these 5-carbon sugars, are nearly identical in DNA and RNA, just missing one oxygen molecule. The second difference, and this is a key difference, is in the number of strands. We learned that DNA is comprised of 2 polymers to make it double-stranded.
Thank you, Rosalind Franklin.
RNA is actually, they're not going to get that joke.
Look it up.
RNA is actually single-stranded. So there's only one strand of RNA, and you can see these pictures, they're switched. But DNA over here, we learned the shape, the double helix. We look at a strand of RNA, it's a single strand. It's missing that complementary polymer to it. And we'll learn there's a good reason why in a future lesson. And then the last difference is in the bases. We learned that the 4 bases in DNA, adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. Well, there's one difference in RNA is that thymine is replaced with a different amino acid called uracil. And again, those amino acids are very, very similar, just missing some hydrogens and a carbon on the uracil, but otherwise still very, very similar molecules. So there's not too many differences. And there are some similarities. So they're both chains of nucleotides, phosphate, sugar, base, phosphate, sugar, base. And those nucleotides themselves are still identical, other than the deoxyribose sugar being a ribose sugar. Now, Mr. Howarth, you're a very small person. DNA and RNA are very similar, but they have some small key differences. Why do you think it's important that RNA is different than DNA?
So the cell doesn't get them confused.
You're absolutely right.
Am I really?
It's
was just a guess.
it's
Cool.
so the cell
See,
can
kids,
tell
just guess. You're fine.
can tell the 2 apart. So that way it knows this one is the DNA. This stays safe inside the nucleus. This one's the RNA. This is the one that I send out to the cell to make proteins. Right? It's a way to keep the 2 apart. It's the reason why blueprints are blue. You look at the blueprint, it's blue. That means that it's a copy, right?
I thought that's the only paper they had that was that large.
Yeah, well, they don't call them pink prints or red prints
This is true.
or orange prints.
Or RNA prints.
None of those things. So they call blueprints, but the blue tells you that the copy. The differences in RNA tell you that it's a copy, so it can go out to the rest of the cell. It's okay if this gets wrecked and damaged. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about is types of RNA. So I've spent this whole time lecturing about RNA, but it turns out there's actually 3 flavors of RNA.
mRNA, rRNA, and some other letter RNA.
Oh, man, you're really close. So here we go. mRNA,
I got 2 out of 3.
tRNA, and rRNA. And each one of these has a different function or purpose in the process of making proteins.
Why are they little letters?
Because it's easier to read.
Oh, okay. Really?
Yes.
Oh, cool.
So I just quickly talk about each of these, and again, in a future class, we'll go into more depth about each type of RNA. The RNA that we've kind of spent this time talking about, which sometimes is just called RNA, is mRNA, or messenger RNA. So messenger RNA is what carries the message from the DNA to the ribosomes to make proteins. So this is our actually blueprint copy of DNA. And for most points in this class, if I say just the word RNA, I mean messenger RNA, because this is just kind of what people typically think of, the copy of DNA. But the same molecule can actually come into other forms that have very functional purposes. The next one is tRNA, which stands for transfer RNA. Transfer RNA is going to be used when we actually start making our proteins. So I said earlier that proteins are made of things called amino acids, and amino acids will chain together to form a protein. Well, tRNA does the job of transferring amino acids to the ribosome to make the proteins. So the example I always give, if you're at the construction site, right, and the blueprint is your mRNA. Well, if you get to the construction site with a blueprint, you're not going to build anything because you need materials. So a bunch of trucks are going to come in with the wood, the hammer, the nails, whatever else you use to build buildings, concretes. They're going to bring all those supplies to the construction site. That's the tRNA. It's bringing the materials to build.
And you can remember that
the
because
building.
T for truck.
Yes, that's exactly how I would remember it. So it's going to bring the pieces that are eventually going to make up that protein to the ribosome so it can build the protein. It's bringing the pieces to the construction site. And then the last type of RNA is rRNA. And so I've said this entire time, and I get out of town, that these proteins are built at sites called ribosomes. So rRNA stands for ribosomal RNA. And it turns out that the things that make proteins are actually built of RNA themselves. So little strands of RNA fold up and they build this structure that's used to build the actual molecule of a protein. It reads the message from the mRNA. It uses the materials from the tRNA and puts them together to build the proteins. You can think of this like the construction worker that's actually going to physically build the building. And for most parts in this class, we just call it a ribosome. But this organelle is actually made of RNA itself.
So where does the RNA in the ribosome come from?
That's a good question.
Oh, yeah.
That's a really good question. Where did the first ribosome come from? I wish
Something had to come first.
I wish I had an answer to that, but science is still full of mysteries. So if we go back here, just a quick review. Let's quickly review. We've already learned a lot about DNA, which holds the code to build proteins, and proteins are what make up the living cells. Remember that DNA has to stay safe inside the nucleus, so it has to rely on different types of RNA to actually make these proteins. RNA is a copy of DNA, so the code of DNA is translated into messenger RNA. Messenger RNA leaves the nucleus and goes to find a ribosome, rRNA. And tRNA brings the amino acids to the ribosome that construct the protein. And then protein is what our kind of end product of this whole process is. Proteins make up living organisms, and the different assortment of proteins gives us the different traits that we talked about from our Punnett squares, etc., etc. Are there any questions, Mr. Howard?
I thought you eat protein in food.
You do, actually. This is actually crazy. We're going to learn about this in a future lesson, but we can talk about it really quickly right now. We said that here, let me zoom out. Your proteins, right, are made of these things called amino acids. Where do we talk about proteins? Up here. So you can see here is a lovely amino acid chain of protein, right? You see all these different colors. They all represent different amino acids. Well, it turns out that your cell, your body, can actually make about 30 or so, maybe 20-something of these amino acids. There's about 11 of them that you can't make inside your body.
Oh, no.
So guess where you have to get them from?
Cows.
You have to eat them from other living organisms that can make them. So a lot of the time we eat meat, we're eating it so we can actually get some of these amino acids that our body can't make ourselves. We call them essential amino acids. Sometimes they're called essential vitamins or things of the sort.
Vitamin B6?
I don't actually know. But some of them are amino acids that you need inside your body to help make your proteins.
Okay.
And then also, if you're trying to make protein in your body faster, it makes sense to put in more of these building blocks. So anytime you eat protein from another organism, you break it down into your amino acids, and then your body reshuffles those amino acids back into its proteins. So obviously, putting more of the ingredients into your body, you can make more of the product.
Oh, cool.
That is a good question, Mr. Howard.
I tried. Thank you.
No more questions because this video is over.
Bye. You want to say bye?
Bye.
All right. You could be more enthusiastic. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Sorry, kids. I tried.